First, I kind of want to know who I'm talking to as far as writing centers. And I guess also before I start, I just want to say it's been a kind of hectic summer, I'm sure, for all of you. So you'll notice that the title that I'm showing you here is a bit different from the title that I had in the abstract. And in fact, I have to admit, I've had to sort of scale back the ambition of what was promised in the abstract. I think in the abstract I said that I wanted to talk about more than just writing centers and really make it a quite broad sort of survey of what's going on in the region. As it happened, I mean, as I said, I had to sort of scale back the ambition. But I hope that, and so I'm definitely going to focus on writing centers, and that's my interest, that's my background, and that's what I'm trying to start here. Technical stuff going on. Okay. Can I do that? Great. Okay. So I thought the theme would be centers, and so here we go. Writing centers and language centers in Central Europe, and I want to ask you guys that are here. Can you raise your hand if you are mostly or generally familiar with what is meant by a writing center when I say a writing center? Okay. And probably an even smaller audience, raise your hand if your university has a writing center. Ooh, yes.
Almost.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Okay, great. So, yeah. And this is sort of a theme. You'll see that the Germans are sort of the leaders in Europe in this innovation. And so we have a lot to learn from them. Okay, so that's good. So basically, a lot of you will be hearing some hopefully interesting and new stuff. These are the... I have... Maybe it's slightly behind?
It should work now.
Yeah, okay. Whoops, okay. Okay, so there's 4 questions that I'm going to try and answer relatively briefly and hopefully entertainingly. What is a writing center, and equally important maybe, what is it not? Where are the WCs, which is a funny abbreviation, but what the heck. Where are the WCs in Central Europe? Where are the writing centers? Why are language centers a great fit for writing centers? And this is sort of the main argument that I want to try to make. And it's a selfish argument because it's basically I want to start a writing center. I think it's going to be a useful thing to have here. And I want to sort of give some reasons why language centers are a perfect place for writing centers. And then I'm going to briefly sort of, based on the ideas that I shared with you, sort of tell you what I think is next for our writing lab, and I'm not going to go into the difference between writing labs and writing centers, but essentially, even though we're calling it a writing lab, it falls under the category of what generally is called writing centers. So here we go. And there's different ways to approach this question of what is a writing center. So I thought I would approach it in 4 or 5 different ways. And the first one is, what are the goals of a writing center? And basically, you can summarize it, I would say, in 2 ideas. The primary goal is supporting writers by talking with them about their writing. And that's intentionally sort of general or simplistic, because really writing centers can do many different things, but most writing centers in the world have this element. Sitting down, either face-to-face, or you can imagine those 2 people wearing masks instead, or doing it on Zoom, which is also a possibility in this day and age. I stole the photo, by the way. It's from a university in Illinois. But basically, I wanted to give you an idea of something, what it looks like. And then the secondary goal is sort of larger and institutional, and it would be supporting good practice in writing pedagogy at the whole institution. So the writing center can have quite a big ambition, but it shouldn't forget that the main ambition is to sit down with students, talk to them, give them individual attention on their writing. So what are the key concepts? And I'm just going to these are like sort of buzzwords that we could say have been associated with writing centers throughout the decades. Writer-centered and student-centered. And that may, that's a sort of almost a cliche, right? That we should be student-centered. But if we're talking about writing and writing pedagogy, a key sort of distinction that a writing center theory makes would be that we're talking about advancing and improving the writer, not necessarily the text. And this is a big challenge, a theoretical challenge and a practical challenge especially for language teachers, for EFL teachers, because we tend to be focused on lexical issues, which, as I'll get into, we're not ignoring in the writing center, but the challenge is to be writer-centered rather than text-centered. Instead of improving the one text that's in front of us at the writing center, in front of the tutor and in front of the student, instead of just focusing on improving that and doing that perfectly, actually improving the writer. Focus on the writing process, so certainly process-oriented, and writing centers usually make it a selling point and a sort of promotional point that we're there to help at any point from planning to editing, right, and anything in between. Writing as learning rather than writing as evaluation and examination of knowledge. And again, this is a challenge especially for this region in particular, and some of the cultural assumptions that we have in Central Europe. Non-authoritative. And writing centers have traditionally made deliberate attempts to avoid the role of a supervisor or teacher. Right? Collaborative learning, again, a major buzzword these days, emphasizing that meaning making is a social activity. So this is where the writer and tutor or consultant, by the way, I'm going to say tutor or consultant. I think in our writing lab, I prefer the word consultant, but in many cases in the literature, we talk about tutors. Basically, the person who's sitting down and helping the writer with their writing. And so this is already a collaboration. And then also writing centers are often organizing peer review groups or peer writing groups. So in fact, collaborating with the writer and their peers. And then we have a focus on holistic and higher order concerns. And again, this is a challenge for language teachers and for teachers maybe with a more linguistic or lexical approach to writing. It's not that we ignore those issues, but the writing center tends to be traditionally the point of the writing center is to go to first and primarily to the higher order concerns with writing. But again, that brings up the question of, well, how do we serve EFL students, right? And we don't want to ignore the issues that they have, right? And pretend, for example, that it's all high order concerns that we have to deal with. That's certainly not true. Another way to talk about writing centers is what do they do? And I have a color scheme here from orangish red at the top, and that's because this is sort of the central thing. It would be very strange to see a writing center that does not, have one-to-one consultations between writers and consultants or tutors. Then, as you go down the list, these are sort of, rarer and rarer things that a writing center might do. However, again, the orange ones there, facilitating or leading writers groups and peer review sessions, workshops and seminars on writing. I would say the vast majority of things that call themselves writing centers offer these services. And then possibly collaborating with faculty, so doing presentations and modules in classes, participating in projects with other faculty. And then the last two are things that you might not see all that commonly. An outreach to primary or secondary schools, recognizing that the writers that we get at the university came from primary and secondary schools. So again, showing them and trying to talk to teachers dealing with these students to sort of prepare these students on the journey towards what they're going to face at the university. And then the last one I put teaching full writing courses. Now, I would say now we're getting out of the world of the writing center and moving towards maybe what you'd call a writing program, right? But there are, especially in this region, there are at least a couple places that are calling themselves writing centers that started as writing centers and then end up teaching full writing courses. Klagenfurt, the university in Klagenfurt, Austria, was one I found that has done this. But there's a reason why I would say writing center people tend to try to avoid the association with actually teaching the courses. Because again, one of the things that a writing center is trying to do is provide a at least slightly more non-authoritative and non-evaluative space. And that becomes more difficult if we're the writing teachers. Of course, the reality is that directors and tutors and consultants in the writing center often do, of course, that is their job elsewhere at the university, is to teach writing courses. So, what is a writing center not? And because writing centers from the very beginning have have had to face sort of misunderstandings and misunderstandings from both other faculty and students as well. There's a lot of emphasis on what a writing center is not, and probably the main thing that we are not is a proofreading or editing service. Or in the literature, sometimes writers have referred to it sort of pejoratively as a fix-it shop, right? Where students would come, leave their paper, and say, "Here, fix this for me, and I'll be back in an hour, and thanks." No, absolutely not. That would ruin the whole point of the writing center. Another important point is that it's not a remedial center for bad writers. You probably already can guess that even the phrase bad writers is not something that most writing teachers, and especially not writing center teachers, would even want to accept as a thing. But again, the history is that writing centers did sort of develop out of remedial courses for students that were having trouble with English or with writing. And again, it's not like a writing center is not for people who are having difficulties and maybe feel like they need extra help, but it's certainly not only for those people, and that's an important point. And the last thing is it's not a writing classroom or an EFL classroom, and the key word there is classroom. Again, writing centers tend to want to avoid the role of evaluator, teacher, and we're doing different things, hopefully, than what is happening in the classroom. Okay, I'm going to try to breeze through this pretty quickly, but I think, again, it is important to see where writing centers came from, and also to see how old they are, and how long this has been a tradition, both in praxis and in theory. The first writing labs, and of course many people have tried to trace it even farther back, but we can say the first writing labs appeared at universities in Iowa and Minnesota in 1934. So, a long time ago. And that's another point to make, is that writing centers are certainly coming out of a American pedagogy and university tradition, so that's something that needs to be thought about and addressed when we're talking about locating them here. In the 50s and 60s, open enrollment caused a boom in writing centers. This was sort of the era when, writing centers really took off in the US. Writing center scholarship as a sort of discipline, you can sort of trace it back to the mid-70s, late 70s, The Writing Lab newsletter, which became the Writing Lab Journal, starts then. In 1984, Stephen North published probably what's the seminal article on sort of defining what a writing center is. And then from now on, I'm going to switch over to Europe, since that's our sort of target here. And even going quite far back, the first writing center in Germany, at least most people identify it as the first writing center, was in Bielefeld in 1993. The European Writing Centers Association, founded a few years later. And there's now dozens of writing centers in Germany. They're still fairly popular, but much, much fewer once you go to the east. Okay? And I just, to sort of round out the question of what is a writing center, I wanted to give you a few quotations that have been sort of again, tried to choose sort of seminal or key ideas. And this was Stephen North in 1984. In a writing center, the object is to make sure that writers, and not necessarily their texts, are what get changed by instruction. Our job is to produce better writers, not better writing. And if you let this sink in and think about all the implications, it actually is still quite a challenge and a sort of rallying cry for what writing centers do that are different maybe from what is expected and maybe what other people think is happening. Another great article, one of the anxieties of writing center pedagogy is that this perception that that the writing tutor or the consultant is sort of doing the work for the student, giving them the ideas and sort of writing their paper for them. Now, whether, we can talk about theoretically, the implications of that, but because of that sort of worry that would be how they would be perceived, I think writing centers have made a big effort to, even down to the level of body language, show that the student is in charge of the text, right? And never let it be that the teacher sort of, or the tutor takes the text away from the student and says, here, let me fix this for you. So Jeff Brooks even suggested these sort of ideas. The primary value of the writing center tutor is as a living human body who's willing to sit patiently and help the student spend time with her paper. Okay, thanks. Sit beside the student, not across a desk. That is where job interviewers and others authorities sit. By all means, if you must hold something, don't make it a red pen. And this one is really my favorite. The more I think about this quotation, I really love it. And this is maybe getting into, this is Ruth Benazer, who wrote about writing centers in German universities. And I think she really gets at the heart of what we can offer students that is different from what a classroom can offer, and maybe really what they're not getting. It took quite a lot of convincing to show that the Writing Center is actually a place to test out the communicative capacity of your writing. So, and I really think this is what a lot of our students don't have. So, where are the writing centers in Central Europe? They're not exactly everywhere. When I wanted to screenshot this Google search that I did, I searched for writing centers in Central Europe a few weeks ago, and the second, of course, I know Google is personalized, so I know that not everybody would get this result, but it was a little bit embarrassing because my abstract for this conference was the second one to come up. So there's some reasons why there might not be that many writing centers in this area, and I'm just going to read the first one because I like it. This was from Gerd Brouwer, who said, "Germany, the country of poets and thinkers. Whenever I hear this phrase, which is intended to highlight the prevalence of literary and philosophical..." So I'm going to try and wrap up pretty quickly here. Philosophical discussion, I nod and add for myself, and a place where one likes to regard poets and thinkers as geniuses, and where writing is still generally understood as something that cannot be taught. So I'm going to leave that for you to think about. And so basically, to summarize, there's questions of English language, this anxiety that the students also are having trouble with language, right? Not just with writing. So this is also an issue here. Not going to spend too much time on here, but I tried to look for writing centers in the Czech Republic. There are sort of, including ours, there are sort of 5 things that maybe are sort of like writing centers. The only one that's calling themselves a writing center is through the Academy of Sciences. Basically, there's nothing in the large state universities. There's nothing that I would really call a writing center. But there is one at the American University, of course. So just to again try to make my case that language centers are a great fit for writing centers. All the cool ideas, collaboration, autonomy, communicative strategies, learners as social agents, all those things that are now, buzzwords in our theory have been part of writing center theory forever. The new Sefer, I was very happy to read it because it gives a lot of sort of theoretical justification for the things that might happen in a writing center. I'm going to skip through these, although I'm happy to share this with anyone if you want to read these later. Institutionally, we have also a lot of advantages. We're a space outside of the language center, has advantages institutionally. We're set up like a lot of writing programs in the US. As far as working with the whole university, not being discipline specific. These are things that might be our advantages, but they also, and they also might be good for us as we face the rising competence of university students coming to us. We need to be more than just a language school, right? So the Writing Center offers an opportunity to serve the university in a new way. But it will take some convincing to show that these are advantages, right? Okay, we've been active as a writing lab. We've been doing stuff online. We've been going to conferences, but we need to do more stuff. We need to get our website working for appointments. That's been an issue with the IT people. We need to do more consultations and collect surveys on how students are reacting to these. We see our major target as PhD and master's students, so we want to find out what they need, maybe survey them, get in touch with faculty, find out what they think the students need and what they need, promotion, grants, etc. So thanks for staying and seeing what we're up to. We're on Facebook, we're on YouTube, so find us, say hi, like us, and I will stop there.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Very motivational speech. Are there any questions? Anything you would like to ask Joe? No, just have a look at Joe. Can you please? Can you manage the questions yourself? Yeah? Oh, okay.
Yes,
Thanks.
Martin Charles University. I would like to ask about contracts, how the tutors are contracted. Is it a full-time position because it must be very time-consuming? Or are teachers from language centers expected to work as tutors? Because those are my concerns.
Yeah. Well, to be honest, we're not even there yet. This is like a fledgling thing. It's basically me right now and my colleague Abigail. It's us right now. We are the tutors, we are the consultants, we are the directors, we are the promoters. It's probably going to be that way for a while. So your question is a very good one. Hopefully, when we get more money and more influence, that's when we have to worry about those kind of questions. Honestly, we're not there yet. I can tell you at other universities, it happens in different ways. Sometimes it's completely volunteer. Sometimes it's students who are trained as peer tutors. Sometimes they get credit. Sometimes they don't, but they may do it out of desire to become a better teacher, a better writer if they're going to go that path themselves. So we haven't had to ask that question, but there's lots of different solutions. But the problem is money, absolutely, and time. You pointed out exactly the problems.
questions.
One more.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, regarding the American tradition, I think that the writing centers focus on writing in English, right? So it's a bit different position, because English is
Yes.
an important language for our students, a second language, but for the Americans,
That's right. So the European situation tends to be much different. Actually, that you bring up a very good question. There might be, in fact, I'm sure there are, because there are some university programs in the U.S. where the students would be studying in other languages. So it is possible, maybe, that there are tutors and writing centers working in other languages. Certainly, there is a huge number of English learners in the U.S., especially from Spanish-speaking families, but other foreign students as well. So there's EFL students. So there's a huge body of L2 and ESL and EFL, how to work with them in the writing center. But yes, you're right that Europe is unique. So obviously, because I'm a native English speaker, my focus right now, as we're getting started, is to focus on students here who have to write in English, and we're helping them. But I hope in the future that then we expand and help students write in Czech, because there's nothing about the writing center that would make it only about English. So theoretically, there's no stop to it, but yes, in praxis, it ends up being mostly English language.
And Simon has one question. What are the issues that folks most frequently have with the writing process? And what advice do you offer, or what support?
Well, I mean, I guess that's an interesting question, kind of a hard question. I mean, because I teach writing classes, I see problems at a lot of points. But I guess I'll say what my students in general here I feel like the problem is, and that is probably more with the pre-writing stages, narrowing down a topic, thinking about what to write, and then of course organizational issues. But I imagine that in the writing, I guess those are sort of the problems that I think are there. But what students often think, especially English learners, that I think they're sort of trained to think that the main problem is their English language skills, right? That the reason why they're not good writers or they're not able to write something good is because their English is bad. And of course, that's, again, not ignoring that as a significant factor. Obviously, students need to be able to write sentences and have the vocabulary to write what they want. But I think that's where the writing center, again, is really valuable, to sit down with the student, ask them questions, find out what they think they need, and sort of maybe sometimes show them that what they think they need isn't really the main problem, right? That they may actually be able to perfectly express themselves if they sort of relax, calm down, use simple language. Again, the one technique that's popular and helpful in the writing center is having the student, if a text is sort of incomprehensible or the tutor or the student thinks it's sort of not good and incomprehensible, have them sort of explain what they want to say verbally first, right? And sometimes it comes out crystal clear, brilliant ideas, right? So sometimes it's the job of the writing tutor to say, okay, start there, write that down, and work from there. Maybe that doesn't seem academic to you, maybe it doesn't seem perfect to you, we'll get there, but first communicate, get what you want to say down in simple language, and then we can build from there. So that's, again, one advantage to having individualized attention. I don't know if that's really an answer.
Well, there are a lot more, but one quick question and then I'll give you the floor. What levels of students, bachelor, master, PhD, do most often use the writing lab? And that's Reka's question.
So far, because, well, as far as language level, you know, most at the language center here, we're basically working with B1 and above students. So, you know, but our target, I think I briefly mentioned it there. Our first target is probably going to be PhD and master's degree students, because I've worked with some of them. I've seen sort of the needs, and I feel like the Writing Center would be something that would be really, really useful for those students who may be sort of at this point in their studies, sort of a little bit adrift. You know, they're not in constant contact with English, they're not in constant contact with a supervisor who's guiding them, and yet they have to produce this writing in English. So if they come to us, I think they could get a lot of help. So that's going to be sort of the main target is basically, I mean, to put it a little bit more broader, the main target would be students who are working on a writing project. And so that tends to be those graduate students.
There was a question.
Yeah, how much is the L1 of the students, the L1 writing tradition of the students an issue?
Yeah, that's unfortunately the part I sort of breezed through
Okay.
quickly, but it is a huge issue because I've asked many students whether, sort of, I have informal sort of anecdotal evidence, but it's been backed up by, again, sort of talking with my Czech colleagues, that, yeah, many of them have never been taught about writing in Czech or in Slovak or in there. So yes, it's sort of, that's what makes teaching writing such a tough job, right? We're not only teaching the language, but we're teaching the concepts, the meta language, as you well know.
And the very last question,
Yeah, that was very near, I would say. Language one is, of course, question number one. And the second one is maybe intercultural differences, because there might be some differences when writing in English academic language, so to say, and Czech academic language, Slovak, Spanish, whatever. So maybe those things are also a question. And you said that the writing centers or writing labs are not common, let's say, in Eastern Europe, because maybe we didn't think about those things.
Yeah. So then, yeah.
Why
So
should
one
I think
jump.
about, yes, why should I think about English writing time or whatever? So could be one of the questions as well.
Absolutely, and that's what I found with the PhD students is sometimes they're writing in English, but they're writing in a sort of more Czech structure or sentence structure, and so part of the sort of hopefully revelatory experience of talking to someone about that and being explicit. So not only so again, in the Writing Center, it's an opportunity to introduce some of that meta language or introduce some of that concept that it's not just the language, it's the structure, it's the whole idea of writing in English, which may have different assumptions, right? So talking about audience, right? That's always going to be a major question in a conversation in the Writing Center. Who is your audience? Who are you writing for? Where do you want this to be successful? And so how do we get it?
Great. We can continue this during the lunch break.
Yeah,
So
thanks
you
very
all.
much for